No, I'm Not a Human is a game about deceit, death, trust, and acceptance. But the game shows you these themes in its story throughout its various interesting and strange endings. Thank you for 10 likes in the last video. You guys showed you obviously wanted more content on No I'm Not a Human. So without further ado, let's dig in. The first ending I want to talk about is probably the easiest to get, at least in my opinion, and that's the ending, Yes, I'm Alone, which is obtained by letting the pale man in. And you know who he is if you watched my last video, but after letting him in, you get a very cool animation where he barges through your door and walks towards you. All this is in 3D before the final scene plays, where a narrator says how even days after he entered the house, it remained empty and devoid of life. People avoided it like it was a dark omen, and rumors swirled around the house. But over time, the house was simply left to rot away. It then goes into a monologue about death, which we'll see is a common theme throughout these endings, but it asks, why do people disappear so completely? And why is it once death finds you, your proof of existence is almost instantly cast away? Everything you worked towards or did, your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, are all simply cast away. But that's the Yes, I'm Alone ending, which kind of shows the main precedent of the game, with you obviously exploring death and its implications, which we'll see more in other endings, and I'll go more in depth on. But with the Yes, I'm Alone ending out of the way, we can move on to... Now, this is the basic ending for No, I'm Not a Human, but I wouldn't call it the canon one, and we'll talk more about that later, but you achieve this ending by making it to day 14 in the game with no visitors in your house at the end. That part is very important, and we'll again talk about why in a minute. But if you manage to make it through all the days with only humans at the end, you'll board up your windows and head down to your basement with all the other human survivors that you've collected throughout the days, and you'll seal the door and simply wait. You wait and wait for 2 months straight as the end seemingly drags on. But one day, you and the others in your basement catch an announcement on the radio. The solar activity is fading, soon it'll be safe to go out in the daylight. But all you feel is disappointment. You're going to live, but what will next summer bring? And that's the ending, which is pretty basic in my opinion. It has a lot of room for people to theorize, simply because it's basic and doesn't have as much depth as the others, but it still goes into what the future might bring and some of the themes of death and, of course, the future. But while we're here, let's look at this ending sibling, and that ending is... Now, this ending is practically the same as the last, but remember how I said having only people was important to the last ending? Well, this ending is if you have any visitors in your home. And, well, things change, as instead of the people surviving together at the very end, distrust builds throughout the 2 months as you all learn to be paranoid, and eventually your fear of death has paralyzed you as you're stuck with nowhere to run. The visitors you let in your home tear you apart limb from limb, and as you die, you're left with the idea of a small house in your mind, hoping it will be over soon, but the pain fades as you slip. This ending, I think, has a little more significance than its sibling ending because of the house. The house will be an important part of other endings later, but also another important thing this ending adds onto is death, as we see ourselves afraid of it. This tells us how afraid our character is in the face of death, and they may not be as steadfast or heroic as we might have thought throughout the game. And again, it builds more onto death itself. But with this ending out of the way, we need to talk about... You get this ending when one of the visitor hunters asks you to prove you're not a visitor, and, well, you fail his check. The ending begins with the man yelling at you as you raise your gun from behind the door, and after a long time of nothing, Bang! You both fire, you're injured, and it hit you in your stomach. You think, though, as you're bleeding out on the floor, how many people he's harmed. He's burned. You decide to open your door and check on him. His face is barely there anymore. Your shot ripped it all off, leaving him barely recognizable as a person. And all you can feel is anger. You start to beat his already decimated face and think of all the people dead due to him. You begin your life as a vigilante, killing all those who slaughter in the name of ending the visitor's scourge. You will drown every last one in blood. And that is the Wrath of a Vigilante ending. This gives a little more insight into our character again, as the moment he lost everything, he immediately turned to vengeance in the most violent way possible, which is very different from how I think the protagonist usually acts in the other endings or throughout the game. But the next ending we're going to talk about is a very strange one, and that's... This is the strangest ending, and no, I'm not a human by far. But you get it if you can accept an old man's book of smiles and read through it. Then he'll come back and take you away, talking about how when mushrooms grow large enough, malice will clump within their mycelium. So they need an outlet for this rage. So you and him perform a ritual that was meant to calm the mycelium down, but it fails, and you run to find the mushroom land as the music slowly distorts. The whole scene ends with a giant mushroom jetting up from below the earth, and the old man saying you were too late. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't really have a single clue on how to connect this with the greater implications of the other endings or this ending on the relation to our character or death or really any of the themes of the game. If there is one, but let's just move on to the next ending, which I believe holds more of implication. And that ending is the... To get this ending, you're gonna have to let in a strange cult leader's flock into your house and make sure that none of them die throughout the course of the game. Eventually he'll come back and say how death has stopped speaking to him, and how the world is going out so quietly. Eventually stops and says he'll be taking his flock and leaving, but before he goes, if you ask him about him and death, he'll say how the thought of eternal nothingness terrifies him and his flock, but the concept of afterlife is a hollow dream by false religions, and rebirth is endless torment with short breaks in between. But they wish to be spared from the worst fate of all, by death, the infinite void. So, that is why they call to her. He finally offers to let you join his flock and possibly find peace as they march their way towards death. You say yes, and the ending scene begins, as a voice says how fear has kept you from returning yourself to death. But you all shall return to the ways of old, and death shall cradle you all like it once did. As is said, a body which is presumably you is left in the sun to burn as you see it, but a dark orb appears from nowhere, offering to hide you, return you to where you were meant to be. It offers to grant you peace, and the ending ends. The ending has a very clear implication to the theme of death that we've seen throughout the game. Instead of fear or anything like we've seen in other endings like our protagonist usually holds, it offers the idea that death is peace, that there is no afterlife or reincarnation, but there's not a void of nothing, and there is but peace. The black orb is also what appears to be death, which we can see her throughout the game in other endings. So we'll talk about her when we see her next. But with that ending out of the way, let's talk about for this ending, you have to let in the prostitute and keep her alive for a few days. You'll notice her writhing in her sleep and her stomach bulging until one day, pop, her stomach bursts and you must find her child throughout the house as it's hidden. Until that night, you leave your home. Something's watching. A fog silently gathers around you and it smothers you. It's completely silent, but you suddenly hear people whispering. You see 3 people in the fog, and you think whether they're a good omen or are they harbingers of disaster? But the child stirs in the arms of them, and you ask yourself, will the child be your salvation or damnation? You raise your gun and blindly fire. More figures emerge from the prophet, along with a woman who asks, don't you see? You are our salvation. And the child would have led you all to a kingdom of horror. And it ends like that, with him taking you away, but you catch the glint of metal nails in the crowd. This ending clearly has biblical allusions, with the child being, more likely than not, the Antichrist, and the three men we see are the three wise men from the Bible. And the people in the crowd speak of sacrifice, and the nails imply that we are about to be crucified, like Jesus as a sacrificial lamb. But this again goes back to the game's theme of death and religion. In this ending, we're going to be killed or martyred for humanity, for a better world. Perhaps this is some new religion, or some new view of death. Perhaps we are a false prophet, like the Cultist said, that all other religions were. But this gives further insight into death and religion in the No, I'm Not a Human universe. But the next ending I want to discuss is... In this ending, you need to call and fully comply with FEMA throughout the game, or eventually they'll offer you to join them. And if you agree, you head off with only your essentials, and you're left very disoriented, wondering if this is really how FEMA hires people. And you continue to ask questions as you go and do your work. You wonder, what happened to your home, those people that lived with you? And you're clearly not meant to live long, as shown by FEMA's policies for you. But you only have one regret, and that's not bringing your poster with you. Now, most of this is pretty basic and just another spin-off ending, but the important fact is the mention of the poster. The poster is a house on an endless horizon that just says, crippling loneliness. And this is so important, but it's important to the last ending I'll talk about, which connects to almost all of these. So just stay with me here. But let's continue talking about endings as I move on to... For this ending, you're going to need to kill 4 humans over the course of the game. And the bald prophetic man will visit you, telling you how he feels something strange in your house and asks if you did anything. You might say that you don't know, but he says that you do. A trail of darkness follows you. He says how being afraid to die is only natural, but you wandered from the path and only brought death closer to yourself. He says how he can't fix this, and he leaves you as you enter the ending scene, where it says how dying is terrifying, but what made you so scared of pain fading away? But you'll die sooner or later, but you get to choose soon. You're thrown out on the street and beaten. You burn in the sun slowly. This ending clearly again ties back into death, showing our character's fear of death, which is seen throughout some endings but less so in others. But we also see how our character seems truly remorseful of his actions and only acted in fear, which is of course another theme of the game, our character's fear of death and dying. But with that out of the way, we're going to talk about the final ending, and the ending that I believe has the most lore implications and is the most canon. And that ending is... Now, this is my favorite ending, and the ending that has the most lore implications in my incredibly professional opinion. To get this ending, you have to follow everything the prophetic bald man says, including letting a cat into your home and digging a tunnel in your basement. But over the course of getting the ending, the bald man will grow more and more sickly, until in his final encounter of you, he tells you that he has been left by whatever was with him, but that you need to jump. You decide to follow his instructions as you head down to your basement tunnel, find a large hole, and well... After jumping, you're met by Death herself, who you can ask questions, but the answer Death gives seems completely incomprehensible, until suddenly you're transported to a large house on an island in the sky. You walk up to the door, but the camera begins to pan out as you ask questions. Is there anything to do here? Are you dead? Where are you? You say how you're afraid, but suddenly all fades to black as we reach the ending cutscene, where it's described how a seemingly infinite amount of time has passed, but you're at peace, and you just want to stay a bit longer. Now this ending very obviously connects to so many of the endings I've talked about, and I'll try to explain a little bit of the connections here. But we are in the same house in the sky as we had on our poster, which is mentioned in the Welcome to FEMA ending. We met death, which we saw in the Cultist ending. We seem to be afraid of death, which is seen throughout so many of the endings. But eventually we will learn to be at peace, which is again seen throughout many endings, where our character first fears death, but then learns peace. Essentially every other ending in No, I'm Not a Human is a puzzle piece building to this ending, where we can find peace in death away from everyone and everything. And that's essentially how they all connect, through this one ending and their combined themes. But, thank you for watching. Maybe throw me a cheeky like and a cheeky subscribe. But with that out of the way, let's just move to my outro song. Hey everybody, this is my outro song. I hope that you do sing along. I'm the Moth Maker, and I make content. Please give me money. I need money. Please subscribe. I don't have a dime. I have really bad rhymes. Please subscribe. This is the outro song. The outro song. The outro song. This is the Moth Maker outro song. Please subscribe. I don't have a dime. If you give me a little bit of your time, maybe subscribe and give me a dime. A dime, a dime, a dime, a rhyme. I got bars from Mars. Girls go to Jupiter to get more stupider. Boys go to Mars to get more bars. That's what I'm saying. My name's not Lars. My name is Mothmaker, and I take time to make these videos, and I spit bars, rhymes, and hymes, and lots of things. So please subscribe and have a good time. Bye.